Chapter 3, Evolution and the Spiritual Body. André Luiz is going to invite us through a journey of evolution in two worlds. He's going to explain in this chapter something that is quite interesting about the origins of life, the birth of the plant kingdom, the formation of the algae, arthropods in the Dromateria Amphithearium, inaugural ranges of reason, missing links of evolution and evolution in time. So he begins this chapter by inviting us to understand the following. He says, in order to have a secure idea about the spiritual body, we will need to go back somehow to the beginnings of life on earth, at the time of the telluric convulsions, in which the angelic ministers of the divine wisdom, with supervision of the Christ of God, laid the foundations of life in the cyclopean body of the planet. What does he mean by this? He says that to understand your spiritual body, my spiritual body, our spiritual body, we need to go back to how life on earth began. And specifically to pay attention to a phenomenon that is called the telluric currents or telluric convulsions, which were supervised by these angelic ministers. So what is telluric convulsions or currents? So let's call science nowadays to explain it to us. So let's go there now. A telluric current is an electric current which moves underground or through the sea. So it's a true phenomenon that happens in the physical and the geological part of our planet Earth. Telluric currents result from both natural and causes and human activity, and the discrete currents interact in a complex pattern. The currents are patterns that happen in the geological formation of the Earth, and they are extremely low frequency and travel over large areas at or near the surface of the Earth. It's quite interesting for us to observe that these currents are responsible for Earth's movement within itself. So these are currents that we'll understand more what they do to what André Luiz explained to us. If you go back to a picture like this, in which this left part shows to us 4.5 average billions of years ago, when life was bubbling on the planet Earth. There was the sowing of the seed, the protoplasmic seed was getting in there. But everything was very warm, very hot, and in that way the telluric currents were flowing into this to make sure life was agitated enough and spreading out. Now, this is the comparison today. This is the current times. Earth is quite colder compared to what it was before. And the movement of the currents, the telluric currents, have changed because, as we've said before, it all depends on not only the natural phenomenon but the human activity nowadays that we have humans on Earth. So André Luiz keeps explaining it to us. We see the bosom of the Earth covered with warm seas, flooded by the huge viscous mass spreading in the lap of the primitive landscape. That cosmic gem sheds the intelligent principle in its first manifestations. So he's going to tell us that our planet Earth, at this very time here on the left, was covered with these warm seas and a viscous mass that will be like a cradle, if we could say in these words, for the intelligent principle or the spiritual principle to be doing its first internships in matter on Earth. Okay, what does that mean? Let's go one step. Spiritual workers, what did they do with it? Nothing on Earth is occurring by itself. We have, just like parents and their children, we have these spiritual workers working upon these seeds of life that he called the celestial monads during millennia. And what are they doing? They were taking these spiritual principles or celestial monads during millennia, magnetizing values onto them and interchanging them amongst themselves. When they say magnetizing values, they are talking about this inception of the values of high moral principles in life and interchanging them amongst themselves. So it's the first steps into the rehearsal of the law of society. We are interdependent. No matter if we think we are independent, we aren't. We depend on each other from the very, very beginning. This process, André Luiz says, occurred under the action of internal heat and external cold. So he's telling us the bottom line, as we learned in the first chapter, that the atomic forces, heat and cold, are a byproduct of the supervision of these architects and engineers of the planet. Now, the first internship that we do in matter as spiritual principles is a protoplasm. That's what André Luiz says. As such, the celestial monads or spiritual principle or intelligent principle express themselves in the world through the filamentous network of the protoplasm from which the organized existence of the globe derivate. Everything begins in the first form, the most simple form, the simplest one, which is the protoplasm. And then centuries of silence or silent activity go by successfully. This is something for us to pay attention. André Luiz, not by chance, tells us precisely how long the periods of each internship took. He's saying centuries, which is quite interesting for us because it's telling us that we spend a long time in the most basic forms, as if you were building a house. When we are building a house, what part of the house takes a long time to be accomplished? The foundation. Because the foundation is the most important part of it, without which everything else, no matter if it's beautiful, big, and express its wealth and beauty, it's going to fall apart. So what is important for us is to understand that it's a principle of nature. Here we will see in the future chapters that in the protoplasm we're acquiring foundational features for our psyche. And as such, we need centuries of repetition in that experience to acquire it and form our spiritual body. Well, he is also saying here that this protoplasm has filamentous network. Let's call science again and see what it means. When we look at a cell, when we look at all the features of a cell, we are looking at these membranes and areas, and the protoplasm is precisely defined as the living content of a cell that is surrounded by a plasma membrane. So we have a plasma membrane because it characterizes the density of it, plasmic. And then this living content is this protoplasm. So everything begins with water. That's why scientists nowadays, they say, oh, we found life in a planet, meaning they didn't find a man or a woman, they found water, which means that if there is water, there's life. Basically, this is the principle, and they are right. From there, the second internship is a little bit more fancy and complex, virus. Viruses appear, says André Luiz, and with them come the primal field of existence, composed of nucleoproteins and globulins, offering suitable climate for the intelligent principles or fundamental monads. They stand out of the living substance through microscopic centers of positive effort and force, stimulating the karyokinetic function or division. Okay, let's break it down. First and foremost, from the protoplasm into a fancier clothing. Each and every internship is like clothing for the spiritual principle. Virus. So next time we think about viruses and be very upset about them when they bother us in the triggering of a flu, we need to realize that actually there are spiritual principles living in that form temporarily. Not saying we want to get a flu or anything and saying, okay, go ahead, take me over. We don't. But we will understand nature from a different perspective. That's why André Luiz's book is one of the most eco-friendly ideas and profound understanding that we have on the planet Earth nowadays. And what are we learning in this internship here? This is the main function, which pertains to the law of reproduction, as we see in the Spirit's book. The karyokinetic division. Let's call biology to explain to us what is a karyokinetic division. And again, this is a principle of ultimate importance, because how are we in the future going to establish a body that is as complex as the human body without foundational features such as the karyokinetic division? What is it? It is as simple as this one. Karyokinesis is basically when one cell divides itself to two cells. That's all it is. To do this movement, we need to do internships in the virus. That's why the viruses are very good at dividing themselves, because that's what the spiritual principles are there for. To learn through that internship the importance of dividing the cells in two. We could even get fancy here and extrapolate that at each and every movement in nature, we're seeing the laws, the spiritual laws of life applied to all these internships. When we learn in the Spirit's book that the law of reproduction is one of the spiritual laws of life, you see it happening right here. Where do we learn it? From the moment we are viruses, not we spirits. It's just a symbolic way to say when we began our journey right there. And this reminds us of Jesus. Jesus, when he told us that in the parable of talents, there we are learning the importance of the law of reproduction, meaning God gives us a talent. We shall do just like the viruses, multiply it. We can't hide the talents. We need to multiply. We need to follow the course of nature that we learn right there when the spiritual principle is doing its internship in the virus. And then you may be asking, what is next? After the viruses, the next clothing is the bacteria. So then he says, the rudimentary bacteria become evident, whose species are lost in the deep foundations of evolution, plowing minerals in construction of the soil, divided by numerous races and groups, shaping by asexual reproduction the primeval cells, which are responsible for the outbreaks of plant kingdom in its beginning. And millennia upon millennia become and go. So he's telling us that the next internship is in the bacteria body. And what do we learn in that body? And he's talking about a bacteria that existed at the beginnings of the formation of the planet Earth. We won't find those. That's why he says rudimentary. We won't find the same species nowadays. They were specific ones in which we were plowing minerals to do what? To prepare ourselves for the next stage. Remember, the aqueous environment, and then the mineral kingdom, and then the plowing of it, and through that, the beginnings of the plant kingdom. And we need that experience for millennia to do so. Now André Luiz invites us to understand more about the formation of the algae. He's going to explain a further step into our spiritual material evolution. After all, we're talking about the evolution in two worlds. He explains to us, in the bacteria and in the cell, the intelligent principle is sustained by the resources of life constituted in the protoplasmic fluid. That's what we talked before, the protoplasm. Now, the intelligent principle is nourished up in the chlorophyll, which shows an atom of magnesium in each molecule, preceding the formation of blood, through which the intelligent principle will be nourished in the animal kingdom. What is he talking about? Here he is revisiting to us the cascade of events in which life evolves in the material plane, and how the spiritual principle is also evolving as it's doing its internships in matter, like clothing that he uses. And he says this beautiful concept, the intelligent principle is nourished up in the chlorophyll. And he says the chlorophyll at the time has an atom of magnesium in each molecule, which precedes the formation of the blood later on in the human body. So we're talking about something that science explains now. When we look at the structure of chlorophyll, we're going to see precisely what André Luiz says. He has a magnesium in each molecule, which will later on in the blood, and we'll talk more about the blood later on in the arthropods, when we add copper as the element. So we are talking about slow, very slow, gradual steps into evolution. After that step, we have the experience in the swimming algae. Time goes by without haste, slowly moving into the cradle of humanity. And the swimming algae appear, nearly invisible because they are in the water, with their flexuous tails circulating in the body of water, dressed in cellulosic membrane and keeping themselves with mineral debris. These algae have extreme sensitivity and motility as ways in which the single-celled monad, or spiritual principle, has evolved, stands the upper stage. In a later chapter, we're going to understand what the spiritual principle is learning while doing the internship in the swimming algae. For the time being, we learn that it's getting its first steps into movement and also sensitivity. It's like the flow of the molecules of water. But something calls our attention. When André Luiz states that it's a slow, gradual movement into evolution, we're so always in a rush to grow, to progress, which is good. But we need to remember we're part of nature, and nature does not take leaps of evolution. It seems to us, but when we study it, slowly and gradually moving from lower levels to upper levels of complexity. Now he says, however, the algae are still plants, which to date, they exist on Earth as filters of primary outcome of the intelligent principles, constantly expanding. Stop, and then we see. He says that the algae now, when we go to the beach and we see the algae, we know what they are for. They are clothing for the spiritual principles, as he says, filters of this primary outcome. So there is a learning experience there. And then we understand that André Luiz is bringing to us a beautiful concept that is beyond what today we learn about being environmentally friendly. It's not only because we need to respect nature, but we need to respect it also because in itself we will find the progress of future souls. From, as Léon Denis, the French master, said, we sleep in the mineral and we are going to wake up in the human. kingdom. However, André Luiz continues, they are, the algae, super-evolved plants in the domains of embryonic feelings and instincts, as the magnesium, and he insists on making us pay attention, the magnesium of the chlorophyll remains as a testament to the species. Meaning, the magnesium that later will still remain in the blood of human body has its origins there at the plant kingdom, showing something that Darwin clearly stated to us, and we agree, according to science, that we evolve physically from species to species. Undoubtedly, and Spiritism adds, not only we evolve physically, but we evolve spiritually. We're not created as human beings because we're so complex. Even in the Bible it says we are created simple and ignorant. The human level is not simple and is not ignorant. So in that case, Spiritism, again and again, we repeat, brings peace between science and religion. There's no war anymore because we can combine Darwin's concept of evolution with creationism, with so much reasoning that no other type of logic would prevail over it. And in that regard, André Luiz explains, succeeding them in order, the green algae of pluricellular features emerge with a new nucleus to be observed. And we'll learn this later in chapter 4, when he says that in there it inaugurates the first steps of sexual reproduction and establishes vigorous shocks in which death appears in the spheres of struggle, causing continuous changes, transformations that will endure in the course of ages in deep dynamism that thus keeping the building up of the forms of the future. The bottom line here is he overviews the reason why we're doing this internship in the green algae. Besides the formation of the blood in the human kingdom that is there in its embryonic stage, we're also learning what we call the sexual reproduction. We'll see more about these features and details in chapter 4, which does not go against science. On the contrary, it adds. And let's remind ourselves that a lot of what he's saying here was only proved later by science. This was 1958. Now we are in 2011. The green algae, for us, we need to understand that they are eukaryotic organisms that follow a reproduction cycle called the alternation of generations. So the alternation of generations is pretty much what this diagram says. And I'll go back. When science explains that reproduction varies from fusion of identical cells, which is called isogamy, to fertilization of a large non-motile cell by a smaller motile one, oogamy. However, these traits show same variation, most notably among the basal green algae, called prasionophytes. This is what we're talking about here. It's almost like a rehearsal of this exchange of gametes that later on we'll see in the human kingdom happening between two beings, that in the algae or the seaweed, they're going to happen based on their own selves when they release the gametes, and science explains there is a synchronization of these gametes to a level that they fuse themselves in water, and for reasons that science are still trying to understand, reproduction happens. We'll talk more about it in chapter 4. For now, we keep our minds closely watched in the fact that André Luiz is explaining to us that in each and every step in material evolution, from mineral to human kingdom, there's a spiritual form, spiritual principle, evolving, learning through effort and recapitulation. This is the continuation of chapter 3 of the book Evolution in Two Worlds. Now we're going to understand that since the intelligent principle left the green algae internship, it immerses itself into the next internship, which is the arthropods, and then later what we call the dromatheria and the amphitheria. Don't worry about the words now, they're quite scientific. We'll break it down as we show you the pictures. As you can see here, the arthropods are insects, bugs. And André Luiz says, later we note the internship of the monad, meaning the intelligent principle, which we referred previously in the arthropods. Scientifically, what is an arthropod? An arthropod is an invertebrate animal having an exoskeleton, external skeleton, a segmented body, and jointed appendages, which are the insects, the spiders, which is the class of arachnids, the crustaceans, meaning the crabs, lobsters, shrimps, and others. So these are the pictures for us to know what an arthropod is all about. So they have an external skeleton. And André Luiz mentions they have a chitinous exoskeleton. And André Luiz is quite right, because this is a molecule of chitin, and the exoskeleton of them are made of chitin, which is a tough, protective, semi-transparent substance, primarily a nitrogen-containing polysaccharide. So he's telling about the composition of their external skeleton. So let us go back once. We were doing internship, the spiritual principle in the green algae, and then later into the arthropods, bugs. Well, and then André Luiz adds another information about why this internship is so important. What are we learning there? What are we acquiring? And he says, the arthropod's different blood presents an atom of copper in its molecular structure, which will then appear while still paired in the condition of chrysalis of consciousness in the realm of higher animals. Why is he mentioning this? Let us remember that he's educating us to understand evolution in two worlds. He's talking about the fact that we as intelligent principles go there, use some type of clothing, acquire some functions and roles and experiences, and then go to another type so we can keep evolving. And everything is going to be cumulative. So whatever I learned today and I acquire today is going to help me expand to a higher function later in another moment of internship. Here he's talking about that in the arthropods, one of the big deals is about the fact that in the blood appears the atom of copper that is going to be the foundation of the blood in the higher animals later on. So let's see what science can clarify in that regard. André Luiz adds another information. Blood is the condensation of the forces that fuel the vehicle of intelligence in the empire of the soul. This is quite important for us. He's telling us that our blood condenses the forces, what is it? The vitality, the vital fluids of the spiritual and physical body. So blood is the manifestation of the vitality. No wonder if we lose blood, we die. Because vitality flows not only in the physical realm, but the spiritual realm. He's going to repeat the same information in another book named Mechanisms of Mediumship by André Luiz. Well, let's see. He says, this denotes the relationship of inalienable individuations of the spirit in the mutations of the form that meets the relentless progress of divine creation. Copper is an essential element, we know by science, for the formation of newborn infants that have higher concentrations of copper than adults. And we know that copper is going to be a fundamental structure for the formation of hemoglobin later on. Let us look at the molecule of hemoglobin. It needs copper to form itself. So what is going to be essential in our blood in another stage has its foundation there in the bugs. So next time we look at a bug, we say, there is an intelligent principle there, learning, acquiring new functions, amongst them essential elements that will be integral for the formation of our blood later when we animate the body of human beings. Quite important. And he wraps up by this part by saying, the spiritual monad does its internships in the marsupials, which are what? The kangaroo, for example, and the Cretaceous of the Median Eocene. Of course, he's talking about the way back when Earth was in its first formations of its species. In the rhinocerontid, which is what? Animals such as the rhino, the elephants, the cervidae, which is the deers, antilopini, the equidae, horses, canidae, dogs, proboscideans, which we will see other species as well in lower anthropodenial of the Miocene. Here he talks about the different internships after the arthropods. It's quite interesting. And then he talks about the eras of geological formation. And he says, this monad or spiritual principle exteriorizes itself in the noblest mammals of the Pliocene. It incorporates acquisitions of importance among the megatheriums and mammoths, precursors of the current fauna of the earth, and it reaches the pithecanthropoids, which is the chimpanzees and primates in general, of the Quaternary era, which preceded the embryonic Paleolithic civilizations. And then, of course, here when he talks about the pithecanthropoids, he's talking about the first human forms. Just so you take a picture, these are the marsupials of the time, and this is what he said before, the Cretaceous, this is the rhinocerians, the cervidia, and all the other ones he mentions. So let's think about the spiritual principle doing internships in all of its species, evolving, 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 way back in the first moments of the eras of geological formation on Earth, and learning. And that's another chapter for us. So it's all about learning. André Luiz then tells us that after all these internships, he says, throughout the above mentioned internships, the monad, again for those who missed it, monad is the intelligent principle, from the spiritual plane into the physical one, underwent the coarser sweeps of adaptation and selection, assimilating multiple values of organization, reproduction, memory, instinct, sensation, perception, and self-preservation, penetrating well the ways of the most complete and laboriously gained in the tracks or errors of inaugural reason. Now, stop. Keywords here for us, adaptation and selection. These internships are about learning the new, adapting to it, and selecting the features that make us survive. So Darwin was right when he proposed that adaptation was a key element for survival. Adaptation is so important for us that when we reincarnate, Many people, they say, oh, this is my reincarnation, but they haven't reincarnated yet because they don't want to learn anything new. They want to keep themselves in the comfort zone of the old tendencies of the past, and they reject anything that proposes to them a new training. How many children you see nowadays, you try to teach them something, they say, oh, I can't do it. And then if parents don't watch out, they're not going to learn anything new. We need to keep pushing them and say, yes, you can. So go ahead, try it again. So it's important to adapt to the new by learning the new. To evolve, we need to learn. To learn means to absorb the new, as Kardec said. New habits need to be acquired so we become educated. And he says about the unknown links of evolution, the missing links that science talks about in this line of internships. He says, we cannot confine the divine principle to simply the physical experience. Once, through birth and death of the form, it undergoes constant changes in the two planes in which it manifests itself. Beautiful. Because he teaches us very well in alignment with the Kardec's teachings in the Spirit book that we need to learn in both realms of life. We don't learn only here, we learn in the spiritual realm. And then he's going to explain, this is the reason why various links of evolution are beyond the research of research scientists here, naturalists, because they represent stages of fragmentary consciousness outside of the carnal field itself, in extra-physical regions, meaning the spiritual realm, in which such incomplete consciousness goes preparing its subtle vehicle. Subtle vehicle means perispirit. Then classified as human protoform due to the degree of evolution in which it is. So scientists nowadays, besides many other missing links, they talk about going from primate to human form. They're still like, where's the missing link? And what they don't know is that our perispirit takes the important leap in the spiritual realm. And then when it connects to matter, it's already presented in a human form. Why does it go this way? André Luiz doesn't explain. What he explains here is that there is a need to evolve in two realms, basically. That's why he says that is how the being travels from the single-celled organism to the complex organism in which intelligence disciplines the cells, being at its service. So discipline is key word here. And he says, in that line of thought, we are under the laws of action, reaction, and renewal. And how long does it take for us to go from a single protoplasmic cell to the first stages of reasoning at human form? He says 1.5 billions of years. The day we were created, immersed in the first internship in the protoplasm to human being, it takes 1.5 billions of years. Isn't life precious? Let's meditate on this, the implications and the consolation of these teachings.